They said he was crazy for buying it, that the crumbling mansion would be his grave. But when this mocked injured veteran tore down a basement wall in that 100-year-old ruin, what he found hidden behind it was worth $250 million and would silence every single person who ever doubted him. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The Arizona sun hammered down on the auction house parking lot with the kind of heat that made asphalt shimmer and patience evaporate. Marcus Webb stood near the back of the small crowd, his right leg aching despite the brace hidden beneath his worn jeans. At 38 years old, he looked older, the kind of weathered that comes not from years but from what those years have taken from you. His face carried the map of places he had been and things he had survived. A scar cutting through his left eyebrow, gray threading through his dark hair far too early for his age, and eyes that never quite stopped scanning for threats that existed only in memory now. He was not supposed to be here. Hell, he was not supposed to be anywhere that involved hope or dreams or the possibility of something better. Those were luxuries for people whose bodies still worked the way they were supposed to, whose minds did not replay explosions at 3 a.m, whose hands did not shake when the sound of backfiring cars sent them diving for cover that was not there. 3 years ago, Marcus had been a combat engineer with the United States Army, diffusing improvised explosive devices in the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, rebuilding bridges that insurgents kept destroying, clearing routes so supply convoys could move safely through hostile territory. He had been good at it, really good, the kind of soldier that commanders trusted with the impossible missions, the ones where failure meant body bags and success meant maybe, just maybe, a few more people made it home alive. His hands had been steady then, his mind sharp, his purpose clear. He solved problems, he took chaos and brought order. He looked at broken things and figured out how to make them work again. Then came the explosion that changed everything. An IED hidden in a roadside culvert detonated remotely while his convoy was clearing a village approach. The blast wave hit his vehicle from the side, flipping it, sending shrapnel through the armor plating like it was tissue paper. Marcus remembered the sound, not the explosion itself, but the silence that came after, broken only by the ringing in his ears and the screaming of his team members who were still conscious. He remembered looking down and seeing his right leg bent at an angle that legs were not supposed to bend. Remembered the blood, so much blood, and the strange detached thought that he should probably do something about that. They put him back together over the course of 8 surgeries. Titanium rods in his leg, 14 screws holding his shattered femur in place, plates in his spine where 2 vertebrae had fractured. They gave him a medical discharge with full honors, a Purple Heart that sat in a drawer somewhere, and a prescription for painkillers that he had stopped taking after 6 months because the numbness they brought was worse than the pain. At least pain meant he was still alive, still feeling something. Now he lived in Copper Ridge, Arizona, a town so small it did not even have a traffic light, where the population sign read 2,300 and dropping. He picked up work where he could find it. Handyman jobs mostly, fixing broken fences for ranchers, patching roofs, repairing engines in garages that smelled like oil and old regret. People paid him in cash and pity, the kind of sympathy that felt like sandpaper on exposed nerve. The locals knew his story, or thought they did. Broken veteran, could not hold down a real job, probably had problems, probably dangerous. They were not entirely wrong about the problems part. The auctioneer, a man named Dale with a substantial beer gut and a voice like gravel scraping concrete, stepped up to the podium and cleared his throat with the enthusiasm of someone who wanted to be literally anywhere else. All right, folks, last item of the day. The old Hartley mansion up on Pinnacle Road. Anyone here even know where that is? A few chuckles rippled through the sparse crowd, the kind of laughter that people make when they are in on a joke that is not really funny. Marcus knew exactly where it was. He had driven past it at least a dozen times since moving to Copper Ridge, watching it decay behind its rusted iron gates and overgrown gardens that had long since gone wild. The house was a 3-story Victorian monster built in 1823 by a mining magnate named Theodore Hartley, a man who had made his fortune pulling silver and copper out of the Arizona earth before the turn of the 20th century. The house had been grand once. You could still see it in the bones beneath the decay. Hand-carved wooden gables, wrap-around porches that had once hosted society parties, tower rooms with widows' walks where women had waited for men who never came home from the mines. But a century of neglect had turned it into something the locals avoided. The roof had caved in on the east wing. Windows were shattered or missing entirely. The paint had peeled away in long strips like dead skin. Vines had claimed the walls, working their way between stones, prying the structure apart year by year. It was a corpse of a house, everyone said, and corpses should stay buried. Roofs caved in on the east wing, Dale continued, reading from a paper with visible disinterest. Foundation is questionable at best. Plumbing is shot. Electrical is, well, let's just say it's original and leave it at that. The city has been trying to get someone to tear it down for 20 years, but it's on the historical register, so here we are, stuck trying to sell a death trap. Starting bid, $10,000. Silence stretched across the parking lot like a held breath. Dale sighed, the sound of a man who had expected this. Come on, folks, it's 12 acres of land. That has got to be worth something to somebody. Land's got sinkholes, someone muttered from the crowd, not bothering to lower their voice. House is haunted, added another voice with absolute certainty. My grandmother said 3 people died in there, fell through the floors. Place is cursed. Dale rubbed his forehead. Starting bid $5,000. Anyone? $5,000 for 12 acres and a historical landmark? More silence. A few people shifted uncomfortably. One couple walked away toward their truck. Marcus felt something stir in his chest, something he had not felt in 3 years, something that was not quite hope but was definitely in the same neighborhood. He had walked through that house once, about 4 months ago, when it had still been open for inspections before the city gave up and decided to auction it off. While everyone else had seen disaster, Marcus had seen something different. He had seen the massive hand-hewn timber beams in the basement, each one a single tree trunk, the kind of lumber that did not exist anymore. He had seen the stonework, laid by craftsmen who had learned their trade in Europe and brought it to the American frontier. He had seen the way the structure was engineered, how the load-bearing walls were placed, how the foundation, despite a century of neglect, was still mostly solid because it had been built on bedrock with the kind of over-engineering that people did when they built things to last forever. The damage was extensive, yes, absolutely, catastrophically extensive. But it was fixable. More than that, it was a puzzle, a challenge, the kind of problem his mind used to solve before the explosion had turned his thoughts into a minefield where every memory was a potential trigger. Starting bid, $1,000, Dale said, and Marcus could hear the desperation creeping into his voice now. $1,000 for a piece of Arizona history. Marcus raised his hand. Every head in the parking lot turned. Time seemed to slow down. He could feel the weight of their stares, hear the whispers starting immediately. That's the Webb guy, someone said, not quietly enough. The veteran who can barely walk, added another voice. He thinks he's going to restore that. He can barely fix a fence without his leg giving out. Poor bastard. War must have scrambled his brains. Dale pointed at Marcus with something that might have been relief or might have been pity. We have got $1,000 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear $1,500? Anyone? Anyone at all? The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the ache in his legs spreading up his spine, could taste the doubt that everyone in that parking lot was radiating toward him like heat from asphalt. Going once, Dale said. Going twice. The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like a rifle shot and made Marcus flinch despite every breathing technique his therapist had taught him. Sold for $1,000 to bidder number 42. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus felt eyes on him everywhere, some curious, most pitying, a few openly mocking. He ignored them the way he had learned to ignore pain, by acknowledging it existed and moving forward anyway, and walked to the payment window. The clerk, a woman in her 60s named Brenda with kind eyes and hands weathered from years of work, raised her eyebrows as he counted out 10 $100 bills from his disability savings, money he had been setting aside for months, eating nothing but ramen and eggs, skipping meals, walking instead of driving to save gas money. "You sure about this, honey?" Brenda asked, her voice surprisingly gentle, the kind of gentleness that made Marcus's throat tight because it reminded him of his mother before she died. "No," Marcus admitted, because there was no point in lying. "But I am doing it anyway." She pushed the deed across the counter, and Marcus noticed her hands trembled slightly as she did. "Good luck. You are going to need it. But for what it's worth, I hope you prove everyone wrong." That night, Marcus sat at the kitchen table of his rental trailer, a single wide piece of aluminum and broken dreams on the edge of town where the rent was cheap and the neighbors minded their own business. He stared at the deed like it might disappear if he looked away. His daughter, Lily, sat across from him, her textbooks spread out for homework she was not doing because she was watching her father with those dark eyes that saw too much, understood too much for a 12-year-old. At 12, Lily had her mother's delicate features and her father's stubborn chin. She was small for her age, quiet in the way that kids get when they have learned that the adults in their life are fragile and need protecting. She had been 8 when Marcus came home from the war, had watched him struggle through physical therapy, through the nightmares, through the divorce when her mother finally admitted she could not handle being married to someone who woke up screaming 3 nights a week. "You really bought it?" Lily asked, her voice careful, like she was approaching a spooked horse. "I really did," Marcus confirmed. "Mom is going to be so mad!" Marcus smiled faintly, the ghost of an expression. His ex-wife, Jennifer, had left 2 years ago, moved to Phoenix with a regional manager from a pharmaceutical company who owned a house with a pool and did not wake up at 3 in the morning thinking he was back in Kandahar. She was not a bad person, Jennifer. She had tried, had really tried, but there was only so much a person could handle. The divorce had been quiet, civil, sad in the way that endings are when no one is really to blame but everyone is hurt anyway. She saw Lily every other weekend, sent child support that arrived like clockwork on the 1st of every month, and occasionally texted to check on them both. She had moved on. Marcus could not blame her for that. "Your mom is always mad at me," Marcus said without any real bitterness. "This will not change much." Lily closed her textbook and looked at her father with an intensity that made him want to look away. "Why did you buy it, Dad? Everyone in town is saying you are crazy. At school today, 3 different kids asked me if you were okay in the head." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, trying to find words that would make sense to a 12-year-old when they barely made sense to him. "How did you explain to your daughter that sometimes you needed to fix something broken because you could not fix yourself? That sometimes you needed proof you could still build instead of just surviving in the ruins of who you used to be? That the weight of being seen as broken, as less than, as someone to pity, was crushing you slowly, and you needed to do something, anything, to prove you were more than your wounds? Because," he finally said, choosing his words carefully, "everyone is wrong sometimes. And I think that house has good bones. It just needs someone who is willing to see past the damage to the potential underneath." Lily studied him for another moment, then nodded slowly like she understood something he had not said. "Like you?" "Like me," Marcus agreed, his voice rougher than he intended. "Then I think it is a good idea," Lily said with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "I think you should fix it up and make it beautiful again. And when you do, everyone who said you were crazy will have to eat their words." Marcus reached across the table and squeezed her hand, feeling the small bones beneath his calloused palm, feeling the trust she still had in him despite everything. "Thanks, kiddo." That night, after Lily was asleep in her tiny bedroom at the end of the trailer, Marcus lay awake, staring at the water-stained ceiling and thinking about the house. He thought about the beams he had seen, the stonework, the potential, but mostly he thought about the way everyone had looked at him at that auction, like he was making the stupidity mistake of his already mistake-filled life. He thought about proving them wrong. He thought about showing his daughter that her father was not just a broken man living on disability checks and pity. He thought about having a purpose again. At 0400 hours, his old military wake-up time that his body still insisted on even though there were no more formations to attend, Marcus got up, made coffee in the pot that only worked if you held the plug at exactly the right angle, and drove out to Pinnacle Road as the sun was just starting to paint the desert sky in shades of purple and gold. The gates to the property were rusted open, hanging at odd angles that suggested they had not closed in decades. The driveway, which had once probably been paved with decorative brick in some pattern that spoke of wealth and taste, was now a minefield of potholes and broken stone, with weeds growing through every crack. And there, rising from the overgrowth like a shipwreck emerging from fog, stood the mansion. In the early morning light, it looked both terrible and magnificent at the same time. The east wing's roof had indeed collapsed inward, leaving rafters exposed like the broken ribs of some enormous beast. Windows were shattered or missing entirely, dark eyes staring blindly out at the desert. The wraparound porch sagged dangerously in places, the wood rotted through where water had collected year after year. Paint, which had once probably been a dignified gray or cream color, had peeled away in long strips, revealing weathered wood underneath that had gone silver with age and exposure. But Marcus did not see the decay, not primarily. He saw the tower still standing strong on the northwest corner, its conical roof intact despite a century of Arizona weather. He saw the massive oak front door, hand-carved with details that must have taken craftsmen months to complete, still solid in its frame. He saw the 4 brick chimneys, each one still straight and true, pointing at the sky like promises. He saw the work of people who had built things to last centuries, not decades, people who had taken pride in their craft and left something behind that mattered. He grabbed his toolbox from the truck bed, the same military-issue metal box he had carried from base to base, now battered and covered in rust spots but still functional, still doing its job. He approached the front steps carefully, testing each one before putting his full weight on it. The porch groaned and creaked beneath him like something alive and in pain, but it held. The door was locked, which was almost funny given the state of the windows, but Marcus had the key now. It was an old-fashioned skeleton key, heavy in his palm, probably original to the house. He fitted it into the lock, felt the ancient mechanism resist for a moment, then give way with a click that seemed too loud in the morning stillness. The door swung inward with a horror movie creak that would have been comical if it was not so perfectly appropriate. The interior stole his breath in a way that enemy fire never had. The foyer was 2 stories tall with a grand staircase curving up to a second-floor landing, the kind of entrance that was designed to impress visitors, to announce that the owner of this house was someone important, someone who mattered in the world. The floors were wide plank hardwood beneath decades of accumulated dust, dirt, leaves, and the debris of slow collapse. To the left, a parlor with a marble fireplace large enough to stand inside, the mantel carved with intricate designs that were still visible under the grime. To the right, what looked like a library, with floor-to-ceiling shelves built directly into the walls, empty now, but speaking of a time when books were treasures and a personal library was a sign of education and status. Straight ahead, a long hallway led deeper into the house, disappearing into shadows. Marcus pulled out his flashlight, the same military-grade LED model he had carried on night patrols, and began his inspection. He moved through the first floor methodically, taking notes on a yellow legal pad he had bought at the dollar store. Water damage in the dining room where the east wing had collapsed. Structural beams sagging in the kitchen but still supporting load. Wallpaper peeling everywhere but the plaster underneath, still mostly solid original hardwood floors, damaged but salvageable in most areas. In the library he found something that made him stop mid-step and just stare. Behind a collapsed bookshelf, barely visible in the beam of his flashlight, he could see markings on the wall. Not graffiti, not the random damage of vandals, but deliberate markings. He pulled the bookshelf away carefully, the wood crumbling in his hands like wet cardboard, sending up clouds of dust that made him cough. Beneath the layers of wallpaper, someone had drawn architectural sketches directly on the plaster. Detailed technical drawings of the house's structure, done with precision and care, but with additions, modifications, rooms that did not exist in the current layout as far as Marcus could tell. He leaned closer, his engineer's mind immediately engaged. The drawings showed reinforced walls marked with double lines, the architectural shorthand for load-bearing or specially strengthened construction. There were measurements in feet and inches, calculations in faded pencil, notes in cramped handwriting that was hard to read in the dim light. And there, in the corner of one sketch, a cross-section of what looked like a basement level, but drawn much larger and deeper than the actual basement Marcus had briefly glimpsed during his first inspection months ago. His heart started beating faster. This was not just a house. This was a house with secrets. He descended to the basement via a narrow staircase off the kitchen, the steps creaking ominously under his weight, his bad leg protesting the uneven descent. The air grew noticeably colder as he went down, and mustier, carrying the smell of earth and stone and time. His flashlight beam cut through absolute darkness, revealing a low-ceilinged space with stone walls that sweated moisture and a dirt floor that had probably never been properly finished. The basement was mostly empty, just some broken furniture pushed against walls, and what looked like the remains of an old coal furnace from before the house had been converted to oil heat or whatever system it had used before being abandoned entirely. But Marcus was not looking at what was there. He was looking at what should not be there. The south wall was stone, same as the other three walls, built from the same granite blocks that formed the foundation. But it was different. The stones were a slightly different color. The mortar was too uniform, too modern-looking. Marcus had spent enough time blowing up buildings in Afghanistan to know construction techniques, to understand how different eras used different materials and methods. This wall had been built later, decades later, maybe even close to a century later than the original foundation. He approached it slowly, his engineer's mind cataloging every detail. He ran his hands across the surface, feeling for inconsistencies, for seams, for anything that would explain why someone would build a false wall in a basement. There, about 3 feet from the eastern corner, his fingers found what his eyes could barely see, a vertical seam, almost invisible, running from the floor to the ceiling. He traced it upward, then searched for and found a corresponding seam on the opposite side, about 6 feet away. A door, Marcus thought, or something like it. A section of wall designed to move. He pulled out his pocket knife and carefully scraped at the mortar along the seam. It flaked away easily, too easily, confirming what he had suspected. This was not structural mortar that had been setting for 100 years. This was decorative mortar, applied as camouflage, probably within the last 50 or 60 years based on the composition. The sun had climbed higher while Marcus worked, and now light was filtering down through the broken windows above, giving him just enough illumination to see without his flashlight. He stood back and looked at the wall as a whole, trying to think like the person who had built this. If you wanted to hide something, really hide it, you would not make it easy to find. But you also would not make it impossible, because you would need to access it. So there would be a mechanism, a way to open it, something clever but logical. His mind flashed back suddenly to Afghanistan, to a compound they had cleared where insurgents had hidden weapons in a false wall. The trigger had been a loose brick 3 walls away, connected by a wire running through the structure. You had to know it was there to find it. You had to think like the person who built it. Marcus began searching the basement, tapping walls, examining every stone, every timber, every surface. An hour passed, then 2. His leg was screaming at him, his back aching from bending over, but he could not stop. There was something here. He knew it the way he used to know when an IED was nearby, that 6th sense that had kept him alive through 2 deployments. And then he found it, or rather, he noticed something he should have noticed immediately. A floor joist above his head, one of the massive hand-hewn timbers that supported the first floor, had a mark carved into it. Not weathering, not damage, but a deliberate carving, an arrow pointing toward the south wall, toward the false section. Marcus followed the direction of the arrow and found himself standing in front of a stone in the foundation that looked exactly like all the others except for one tiny detail. It was not quite flush with the surrounding stones. It stuck out maybe 1/8 of an inch, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. He pressed it. Nothing happened. He pulled it. Still nothing. He tried twisting it and felt it move, rotating in its setting like a dial. Something deep in the walls made a grinding sound, metal on metal, ancient mechanisms waking up after decades of sleep. Marcus stepped back, his heart pounding, and watched as a section of the south wall, the 6-foot section between the seams, shifted inward about 1/2 an inch with a sound like a sigh. "Holy hell!" Marcus whispered into the darkness. He grabbed his flashlight and pry bar and approached the shifted section. Up close, he could now see it was indeed a door, or more accurately, a section of wall mounted on hidden hinges. He worked the pry bar into the gap and pulled. The door resisted, decades of disuse making the hinges stiff and reluctant, but slowly, with a groaning protest that echoed through the basement, it swung open. A rush of air flowed out, cold and dry, carrying with it a smell that Marcus recognized from his military days, the smell of a space that had been sealed for a very long time, air that had not circulated in decades, stale but not foul, just old. Marcus shined his flashlight into the opening and saw a passage, maybe 4 feet wide, stretching into darkness. The walls were lined with brick, fitted so tightly together that not even a knife blade would fit between them. The floor was poured concrete, smooth and level. This was not a storm cellar or a root cellar or any normal basement feature. This was something else entirely, something purpose-built, something hidden. His hands were shaking as he checked his phone. No signal down here, which was not surprising given that he was underground in a stone foundation. He looked at the passage, at the darkness beyond his flashlight beam, and for just a moment he hesitated. This was the moment where the smart person, the careful person, would stop, would go back upstairs, would call someone, would not go into a hidden passage alone in an abandoned house that could collapse on him at any moment. But Marcus had not bought this house by being smart or careful. He had bought it by being stubborn and desperate and willing to take risks that made sense only to someone who had already lost almost everything that mattered. He stepped into the passage. The temperature dropped immediately, at least 10 degrees cooler than the already cool basement. His footsteps echoed strangely, the sound bouncing off the brick walls in ways that made it hard to judge the size of the space. He followed the passage as it curved gently to the left, descending at a slight grade, going deeper underground. After about 30 feet, the passage opened into a chamber. Marcus stopped in the doorway, his breath catching in his throat, his flashlight beam sweeping across a space that should not exist, that could not exist, but absolutely did exist. The chamber was roughly 20 feet square, with a ceiling about 10 feet high. The walls were lined with built-in cabinets and shelves, all made from dark wood that looked like mahogany or walnut, sealed with a varnish that had preserved them perfectly in the dry, cool air. And on those shelves, carefully stored, meticulously organized, were items that even in the dim beam of his flashlight, Marcus could recognize as valuable. Paintings wrapped in oiled cloth, document boxes made from wood and leather, display cases with glass tops, the glass somehow unbroken after all these years. Metal storage containers stacked neatly, each one labeled in handwriting he could not quite read in the uncertain light. Marcus took one step into the chamber, then another, feeling like he was walking into a dream or a trap or maybe both. He approached the nearest painting, his hands trembling as he carefully unwrapped just enough of the oiled cloth to see what was underneath. An oil painting, a landscape, mountains at sunset rendered with such skill and detail that even his untrained eye could recognize it as the work of a master. The colors were still vibrant, protected from light and air and time by whoever had stored it here. In the bottom corner, a signature he could not quite make out. He moved to another wrapped painting, then another. Each one was a masterpiece, carefully preserved, waiting in the dark. His mind was racing now, trying to process what he was seeing, trying to understand what this meant. Theodore Hartley, the mining magnate who built this house in 1823, had hidden a collection down here. But why? And what else was hidden in this place? Marcus knew he should go back upstairs, should call someone, should document this properly. But he could not stop now. He had to see. He had to know. He found the passage to the second chamber, his flashlight revealing more shelves, more storage, more impossible treasures hidden beneath a house that everyone in Copper Ridge thought was worthless. And somewhere in the back of his mind, past the shock and the wonder and the disbelief, Marcus Webb understood that his life had just changed in ways he could not begin to comprehend. The house everyone mocked him for buying, the house that was supposed to be his grave, had just become something else entirely. It had become his salvation. Marcus stood in that underground chamber for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, his flashlight beam moving from one carefully stored treasure to another, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what he had stumbled into. But even as wonder and disbelief warred in his chest, the practical part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive in combat zones, started asking questions. What was he supposed to do with this information? Who did these things belong to? And most importantly, what would happen if anyone found out? He backed out of the passage slowly, carefully, the way he used to back away from suspicious packages in Afghan villages, and sealed the door behind him. The mechanism worked in reverse, the stone rotating back into place, the wall sliding shut with that same grinding sound. Within seconds it looked exactly like every other section of basement wall, unremarkable, forgettable, safe. Marcus climbed back upstairs on legs that shook from more than just the strain on his bad knee. The morning sun was streaming through the broken windows now, painting stripes of gold across the dusty floors, making the destruction seem almost beautiful in a haunted kind of way. He walked through the first floor in a daze, seeing the house differently now, understanding that every beam and stone and hidden corner might be concealing something extraordinary. But standing in the foyer, looking up at the water-stained ceiling and the sagging staircase, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. He was not going to tell anyone about the hidden chamber, not yet, maybe not ever. First, he was going to restore this house the way he had planned, the way everyone said was impossible. He was going to prove he could do that much. The rest, the hidden treasures and their implications, could wait. Because if he was being honest with himself, Marcus needed this project more than he needed whatever fortune might be hidden in that basement. He needed to prove he could still build something, could still take broken pieces and make them whole. The discovery did not change that. If anything, it made the restoration feel even more important, like the house was trusting him with its secrets, and he needed to be worthy of that trust. That afternoon, Marcus returned to the trailer and made lists, the way he used to make mission plans before operations. He needed tools, materials, a strategy for tackling the work in stages. He spread his research across the kitchen table, Old books from the library about Victorian architecture, printouts about historical restoration, sketches he had made during his initial inspection. Lily came home from school and found him surrounded by papers, his coffee gone cold, his expression more focused than she had seen in months. "You look like you are planning a war," she said, dropping her backpack by the door. "Same principle," Marcus replied. "Break the objective down into achievable steps. Secure your supply lines. Adapt when things go wrong, and they will go wrong." "Can I help?" she asked, and something in Marcus's chest loosened at the hope in her voice. "Absolutely," he said. "I am going to need someone to hand me tools and tell me when I am being stupid." She grinned. "I am really good at that second part." The restoration began in earnest the following Monday. Marcus started where every good engineer starts, with the foundation and structure. He spent 3 days just inspecting every beam, every joist, every load-bearing wall, documenting what was sound and what needed reinforcement. The house was in worse shape than he had initially thought, but it was also stronger in ways that surprised him. Those hand-hewn beams were solid oak, some of them 2 feet thick, and they had barely warped despite a century of temperature changes. The foundation, that granite bedrock construction, was virtually indestructible. He worked alone at first, partly because he could not afford to hire help, partly because he was not sure he could handle having other people around all day. The isolation was good for him in some ways, bad in others. Good because he could work at his own pace, could take breaks when his legs screamed, or when the flashbacks got too intense. Bad because the silence of the empty house sometimes felt too much like the silence after an explosion, that terrible quiet where you are waiting to find out who is still alive. The military had trained him well, though. Combat engineers did not just blow things up, they built them too. Marcus knew how to read structural plans, how to calculate load distribution, how to improvise solutions when the proper materials were not available. He knew how to work with wood, metal, concrete, stone. He knew how to be patient with a project that would take months or years, not days. Afghanistan had taught him that some battles were won through persistence, not speed. By the end of the first week, he had shored up the sagging kitchen beam with temporary supports and tarped over the collapsed section of the east wing to prevent further water damage. It was not pretty, but it was functional, and that was what mattered. By the end of the second week, he had discovered something that made him pause. While removing water-damaged plaster in the dining room, he found that the walls were not standard construction. They were double thickness, with an air gap between the inner and outer walls. Not for insulation, that was not how they built houses in the 1820s. For soundproofing maybe, or for security, but either way it was unusual, expensive, deliberate. Theodore Hartley had built this house like a fortress, and Marcus was beginning to understand why someone might need a fortress. The town's mockery continued and intensified. At the hardware store, where Marcus bought supplies he could barely afford, the clerk made jokes about whether he wanted a coffin-sized tarp, since that was where this project was heading. At the diner where he sometimes grabbed breakfast, people whispered and pointed. A few were kind, wishing him luck with genuine sympathy, but most seemed to view his restoration attempt as entertainment, something to laugh about over beers. Then came the newspaper article. The Copper Ridge Gazette was a weekly paper that mostly covered high school sports and city council meetings, so Marcus was surprised when Lily came home one Thursday afternoon with a copy, her face tight with anger. "You need to see this," she said, slapping it down on the kitchen table. The headline read, "Local Man's Quixotic Quest, Veteran Attempts Impossible Restoration." Below it was a photograph someone had taken of Marcus standing in front of the mansion, his work clothes dirty, his face exhausted, his body weight resting heavily on his good leg. The caption read, "Marcus Webb, 38, attempting single-handedly to restore the historically protected but structurally unsound Hartley Mansion. Local contractors give the project zero chance of success." The article itself was worse. It quoted Rick Shaw extensively. "I have been in construction for 30 years and I would not touch that place. The foundation is compromised. You have got mold, asbestos, lead paint, structural damage that would cost millions to properly repair. For a guy with no real construction experience and limited mobility to think he can handle this, it is just sad. Someone needs to tell him to quit before he gets himself killed. There were other quotes, from the fire chief about fire hazards, from a structural engineer about collapse risks, from the mayor about how the city had given up on the property and was just waiting for nature to finish the job. Not a single person they quoted had anything positive to say. Marcus read it twice, feeling something cold settle in his stomach. Not anger exactly, something closer to determination. "They are wrong," Lily said fiercely. "They do not know what you can do." Marcus folded the paper carefully and stood up. "Then I guess I better show them." He pinned the article to the wall in the mansion's library, right next to his work schedule. On the days when his body screamed at him to quit, when his leg throbbed so badly he could barely stand, when the financial reality of running out of money made him want to just walk away, he would look at that article and find the strength to keep going. 3 weeks into the restoration, Marcus got his first real setback. He was working on removing the damaged ceiling in what had been a bedroom on the second floor, carefully prying away water-damaged plaster when a section he thought was stable suddenly gave way. 20 square feet of ceiling and the rotted support beam behind it came crashing down, missing Marcus by inches as he dove sideways. The impact sent up a cloud of dust so thick he could not breathe, could not see, and for a terrible moment he was back in Afghanistan, choking on smoke and debris, trying to find his teammates in the rubble. He crawled to the hallway on his hands and knees, gasping, his heart hammering, waiting for the panic attack to pass. It took 15 minutes before he could breathe normally again, another 10 before he could stand without his legs shaking. When he finally made it back downstairs and outside, he found an elderly woman standing in the overgrown front yard, one hand shading her eyes as she looked up at the house. She was tiny, maybe 5 feet tall, with white hair pulled back in a loose bun and a face lined with decades of Arizona sun. She wore a simple cotton dress and practical shoes, and she held a covered basket in her other hand. "You all right, young man?" she asked as Marcus stumbled onto the porch. "I heard a crash." "Fine," Marcus managed, his voice hoarse from dust. "Just some ceiling came down." "Surprised the whole thing has not come down by now," she said, but not unkindly. "I am Rose. I live about a mile down the road. Been watching you work here for a few weeks now. Thought you might appreciate some food that was not from a can." Marcus looked at her more carefully. There was something sharp in her eyes, an intelligence that the gentle voice did not quite hide. "Marcus," he said, "and yeah, that would be amazing, actually." She handed him the basket. Inside were sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, homemade cookies, a thermos of what smelled like soup. His eyes burned with unexpected gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "You did not have to do this." "No," Rose agreed. "But my grandmother always said the best way to know a person's character is to see what they do when everyone else says it is impossible. Come sit down before you fall down. You look like you have seen a ghost." They sat on the porch steps, Marcus eating mechanically while Rose talked. She had lived in Copper Ridge her whole life, 83 years, and her grandmother before her had worked in this house back in the 1940s as a housekeeper. The Hartley family had already moved away by then, but a distant relative had maintained the property for another decade before finally abandoning it. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about this place," Rose said, her voice taking on the quality of someone remembering old tales. "About Mr. Theodore Hartley, who built it. He was a strange man," she said, "brilliant but paranoid. Made his fortune in the silver mines, but he did not trust banks, did not trust the government, did not trust anyone really. When he built this house, he built it to last and to protect." "Protect what?" Marcus asked, thinking about the hidden chamber. Rose smiled mysteriously. "That depends on who you ask. Some folks said he was protecting his money. Others said he was protecting secrets, things he had learned in the mines, formulas or techniques that made him rich. My grandmother said he was just protecting himself from a world he thought was going to collapse. What happened to him? Died in 1931. Heart attack, supposedly, though there were rumors. He was found in his study upstairs, papers all around him, like he had been working right up until the end. They said his fortune disappeared, that he had lost everything in the stock market crash of '29. But my grandmother never believed that. She said a man like Theodore Hartley would have planned for hard times, would have hidden things away where no one could touch them. Marcus felt his pulse quicken but kept his face neutral. Did anyone ever find anything? People searched, Rose said. Oh, they searched for years after he died. Tore up floorboards, knocked holes in walls, dug up the gardens, never found a thing. Eventually, people decided it was just a story, and the house sat empty. Generations came and went. The house just waited. Waited for what? Rose looked at him with those sharp eyes. Maybe for someone stubborn enough to actually care about it. Someone who could see past the ruin to what it used to be. Someone who needed it as much as it needed them. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, the tightness that had been there since the ceiling collapse easing a little. When Rose left, she patted his arm and told him she would check on him again soon. As Marcus watched her walk back down the long driveway, he realized he had just found his first ally in Copper Ridge. The restoration continued through the brutal Arizona summer. Marcus developed a routine. Work from dawn until the heat became unbearable around 2 in the afternoon, break for a few hours, then return in the evening when it cooled down. He reinforced floor joists, replaced rotted sections of the porch, hauled out literal tons of debris and water-damaged materials. His hands developed new calluses on top of old scars. His body ached in ways that made his war injury feel like a minor inconvenience by comparison. But there were victories too. Small ones at first, then bigger. He got the water shut off and the pipes drained so they would not freeze and burst in winter. He secured the tower room, which turned out to have the most incredible intact stained glass window depicting a mountain landscape. He stabilized the grand staircase enough that it could be walked on without fear of collapse. And Lily came every weekend, his faithful assistant. She was good at the detail work, scraping paint, sorting hardware, organizing tools. But more than that, she was good at seeing progress where Marcus only saw how much work remained. Look, Dad, she would say, pointing to a section of floor they had cleaned and repaired. That is beautiful. That is actual wood from actual trees that were actual giants. You are saving something that matters. On those days, Marcus believed her. But the money situation was getting desperate. His disability check covered rent and food barely, but the restoration was eating through his savings at an alarming rate. Materials were expensive, even buying second-hand. He needed a new circular saw after his died, needed lumber, needed concrete mix, needed roofing materials, needed 1,000 things. By the end of July, he had exactly $217 left in his account and at least $5,000 worth of critical repairs still to do before winter. He sat in his truck one evening, parked in front of the mansion, seriously considering giving up. He could walk away now, let the bank foreclose on the $8,000 loan he had taken out using the property as collateral, go back to his handyman jobs and his trailer and his small life. No one would blame him. In fact, most people were expecting it. His phone rang. Jennifer, his ex-wife. "Hey," she said when he answered. "How is the house project going?" "It is going," Marcus said, too tired to elaborate. "I heard about the newspaper article. That was pretty harsh." "Yeah." There was a pause. "Marcus, I am not trying to be that person, but are you sure about this? Lily said you are running out of money. Maybe it is time to cut your losses." Something hot flared in Marcus's chest. "Is that what you think, that I should quit? I think you have already survived one war, Maybe you do not need to fight another one against a house that does not want to be saved. Marcus looked up at the mansion, at the tower window catching the last rays of sunset, turning the old glass into liquid gold. What if it is not the house I am trying to save? Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. Then I hope you figure out what you are really fighting for, because Lily needs a father, not a martyr. She hung up. Marcus sat there as the sky turned dark, wrestling with himself. She was right, of course. He was spending money he did not have, time he could be using to work actual paying jobs, energy that left him too exhausted to be fully present with his daughter. But every time he thought about quitting, about walking away, he felt like he would be proving everyone right, that he was broken, limited, less than he used to be. That night, he could not sleep. At 2 a.m, he got dressed and drove back to the mansion, needing to see it, needing to remember why he had started this impossible task. He let himself in with his key, turned on his work lights, and stood in the foyer looking up at the progress he had made. It was not much, not compared to what still needed doing, but it was something. The staircase was stable. The first floor was mostly cleared of debris. Several rooms had been cleaned down to their original plaster and wood. He walked through the house, his footsteps echoing, and ended up in the library. This room had become his headquarters, where he kept his tools and plans, where he took breaks on the days when the work got too hard. The walls were still lined with those built-in shelves, empty now but solid, beautiful craftsmanship that had survived a century. Marcus ran his hand along one shelf and felt something catch. A splinter, maybe, or a nail head. He pulled out his flashlight to look closer and saw not damage, but a mark, carved into the wood. An arrow, subtle but deliberate, pointing downward. His heart started beating faster. He followed the direction and found another mark, this time on the wainscoting below the shelves. Another arrow pointing left. He followed it to the corner of the room where 2 walls met, and there, carved into the molding so faintly it was almost invisible, were letters. T.H. Theodore Hartley. Marcus pressed on the molding, tapped it, ran his fingers along every inch. Nothing happened. He stepped back, thinking. The arrow pointed down and left. Down toward the basement, left toward the south wall where he had found the hidden passage. But this was the library, not the basement. The same library where he had found the architectural drawings on the wall. He walked back to that wall, now exposed after he had removed all the water-damaged wallpaper. Those drawings were still there, faded but visible. Structural plans, reinforcement details, that oversized basement layout. And there, in the corner of the basement diagram, so faint he had missed it before, was another mark. Not an arrow this time, but a symbol that looked like a keyhole. Marcus felt electricity running up his spine. He had found the passage in the basement, yes, but what if there was another way in, another entrance hidden somewhere in the house itself? What happens next will turn this restoration upside down, reveal a truth that has been buried for nearly a century, and remind us why sometimes the world's greatest treasures are hidden in the places everyone else has given up on. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you are enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Marcus spent the next hour examining every inch of that library wall, pressing on stones, pulling on molding, searching for whatever mechanism Theodore Hartley had hidden here. The night stretched on, and he was about to give up when his hand pressed on a section of wainscoting and felt it give, just slightly, like a button. A soft click echoed from somewhere behind the wall. Marcus froze. Slowly, he stood up and stepped back. One of the built-in bookshelves, the tall one in the corner where the arrows had pointed, had shifted. Just an inch, but enough to break the seal that had held it flush with the wall. He could see a thin line of darkness now running along its left edge. His hands were shaking as he grabbed the edge and pulled. The entire bookshelf unit, 8 feet tall and 4 feet wide, swung outward on hidden hinges that were so well balanced it moved almost silently despite weighing probably 300 pounds. Behind it was darkness, a space, an opening. Marcus shined his flashlight into the gap and felt his breath catch. A staircase, narrow and steep, descending into blackness. But not rough-cut steps like the ones to the basement. These were finished, carpeted once upon a time, with a handrail mounted to the wall. A proper staircase built with care, meant to be used regularly but hidden from view. This was not a secret passage designed for emergencies. This was a private entrance, something the owner of the house used often, something he wanted concealed from servants and visitors and anyone who might be watching. Marcus remembered Rose's words. He was protecting something. Some folks said money, others said secrets. His military training screamed at him to proceed carefully. Unknown spaces were dangerous. This staircase had been sealed for who knew how long. It could be unstable, could collapse, could contain hazards from toxic mold to structural failure. But the part of him that had been drawn to this house from the beginning, the part that needed to know, that needed to understand, was already moving forward. He descended slowly, testing each step before putting his full weight on it. The stairs were solid, built into the stone foundation itself, not wood that could rot. After about 20 steps, the staircase opened into the same underground passage he had found from the basement, but from the opposite direction. He was approaching the hidden chambers from above, through Theodore Hartley's private entrance. Understanding washed over Marcus. Hartley had built 2 ways into his hidden vault. One through the basement, disguised as a false wall, accessible but difficult. And one through his library, the room where he worked and spent his time, giving him direct, convenient access to whatever he was protecting down here. The chambers were exactly as Marcus had left them weeks ago, untouched, waiting. But now, standing at the entrance with the knowledge of how much care and planning had gone into hiding these spaces, Marcus felt the full weight of what he had stumbled into. This was not just a hidden room. This was a life's work, a fortune, a legacy that Theodore Hartley had gone to extraordinary lengths to protect and conceal. And somehow, impossibly, Marcus had found it. He made his way back up to the library, his mind spinning. Dawn was breaking, pink light starting to filter through the dusty windows. He sat down on the floor, back against the wall, and tried to process what this all meant. He had bought this house for $8,000, planning to restore it and maybe, just maybe, prove he was not the broken failure everyone thought he was. Instead, he had found secret passages, hidden chambers, and what he suspected was a fortune in art and artifacts hidden by a paranoid mining magnate nearly a century ago. The practical questions started flooding in. Did he have legal right to whatever was down there? Would the state claim it? Would he have to report the discovery? And underneath all of that, the question that really mattered, what was he supposed to do? A sound made him look up. Rose was standing in the library doorway holding another basket of food, her sharp eyes taking in the open bookshelf, the revealed staircase, and Marcus's shell-shocked expression. "So," she said calmly, as if she found secret passages every day. "You found it then?" Marcus stared at her. "You knew?" Rose walked into the room and set down her basket. "My grandmother told me stories. About Mr. Hartley working late into the night in his library, how she would hear his footsteps but when she came to bring him tea he would not be there. About spaces in the house that seemed bigger on the outside than the inside. About how he smiled like a man with secrets on the day he finished building this place. She looked at the open passage. She always suspected he had hidden something important. Looks like you are the first person to find it." "I do not know what to do," Marcus admitted, his voice rough. Rose sat down beside him on the floor, her old bones creaking. "What did you find down there?" "I have not fully explored it," Marcus said, which was not exactly a lie. "But there are chambers, storage rooms, things that look valuable. I think he hid his fortune, the one everyone assumed he lost.
And you are worried about what finding it means.
I am worried about a lot of things. Marcus rubbed his face with both hands. I am running out of money. I am about to lose this house. My ex-wife thinks I am crazy. The whole town thinks I am wasting my life. I could probably sell one thing from down there and have enough to finish the restoration, but I do not even know if it is legally mine or if I would be stealing or what happens when the government finds out. Rose was quiet for a long moment. Can I tell you what my grandmother told me about Theodore Hartley? She said he was not a bad man, just a frightened one. He had lived through panics and crashes, had seen fortunes disappear overnight, had watched the government seize property and banks collapse. He did not hide his wealth because he was greedy. He hid it because he was terrified of losing it, of being left with nothing after working his whole life. That does not really help me figure out what to do, Marcus said. Maybe not, Rose agreed, but it might help you understand why you are here. You know what I see when I look at you? I see a man who is terrified the same way Hartley was. Terrified that everything that made you who you were is gone, that you have nothing left worth protecting, that the world sees you as broken and maybe they are right. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow because they were true, so painfully true. But here is what Theodore Hartley never understood, Rose continued. The things you hide away for protection eventually become prisons. He spent his whole life building walls and hiding treasures, and when he died, what good did any of it do? The fortune sat in the dark while the world moved on without it. She stood up slowly, joints protesting. You have got a choice now. You can keep this secret, protect it the way Hartley did, hide away from the consequences and the complications. Or you can do what he never could. Trust that bringing it into the light is worth the risk. Marcus watched her gather her basket. What would you do? Rose smiled. I would finish restoring this house first. One problem at a time, young man. Whatever is down there has waited nearly a century. It can wait a few more months while you figure out what you are really fighting for. She left him sitting there as the sun climbed higher, painting the library in shades of gold and amber. Marcus looked at the open passage, then at the newspaper article still pinned to his wall, then at the work schedule he had made showing months of restoration still ahead. Rose was right, one problem at a time. He stood up, closed the hidden bookshelf, and heard the mechanism click back into place. The library looked normal again, unremarkable, just an empty room with built-in shelves and water-stained walls. The secrets could wait. First, he had a house to save, and maybe in saving it, he would figure out how to save himself. For 2 months after finding the library passage, Marcus kept his promise to himself. He did not go back down to the hidden chambers. He did not explore further. He focused entirely on the restoration work, on the visible, tangible problems he could solve with a hammer and determination. He reinforced the east wing structure, replaced sections of rotted flooring, rewired the first floor using techniques from 1920s electrical systems that he had researched obsessively at the library. The work was hard, expensive, and slow, but it was progress. Rose checked on him twice a week, always bringing food, always asking about the restoration, but never mentioning what lay hidden beneath. It became an unspoken agreement between them. First the house, then the secrets. Lily came every weekend, and together they stripped wallpaper, cleaned windows, and slowly brought pieces of the mansion back to life. The local mockery continued, but Marcus found he cared less with each passing week. He was too tired to care, too focused on the work, too invested in proving that this house could be saved. By late September, as the brutal summer heat finally broke and the desert nights turned cool, Marcus hit a wall. Not a physical one this time, but a financial one that was just as solid. He sat in his truck outside the hardware store, staring at his bank statement on his phone. $143.12. He needed lumber, needed roofing materials, needed basic supplies to continue the work. His disability check would not come for another week, and even then it had to cover rent, food, gas, and Lily's school expenses. He could not ask Jennifer for money. He could not ask Rose, who was living on a fixed income herself. He had maxed out the small loan the bank had given him, using the property as collateral. There were no more options, no more ways to stretch pennies into dollars. Marcus drove back to the mansion and sat in the library, the room that had become his refuge and his headquarters. He looked at the bookshelf that concealed the passage, the bookshelf he had not opened in 2 months. The answer to all his financial problems was right there, 20 feet beneath his boots. One painting, if his suspicions about their value were correct, could fund the entire restoration. One gold bar could give him breathing room. One anything from those chambers could change everything. But taking something felt like theft, even though legally the house and everything in it belonged to him now. It felt like betraying Theodore Hartley's trust, like proving he was just another person who saw those treasures as a solution to his problems rather than something worth protecting for its own sake. He sat there until the sun set, wrestling with himself. Finally, as darkness filled the library and his stomach growled because he had skipped lunch to save money, Marcus made his decision. He would go back down, not to take anything, but to properly document what was there, to understand the full scope of what Hartley had hidden, because if he was going to protect this secret or reveal it, he needed to actually know what he was dealing with. Marcus pressed the hidden button, heard the familiar click, and watched the bookshelf swing open. He grabbed his military flashlight, a notebook, and his phone to take photographs. Then he descended the narrow staircase into the passage below. The air was exactly as he remembered, cool, dry, still. The passage stretched ahead, lit now by his powerful flashlight, revealing details he had missed in his previous rushed exploration. The brick walls were not just functional, they were beautiful, laid in a herringbone pattern that spoke of craftsmanship and care. The mortar between them was still solid, no cracks, no deterioration. Every 10 feet there were small ventilation shafts running up through the foundation, ingeniously disguised on the surface as decorative stone elements, but actually providing airflow to keep the underground spaces from becoming damp and moldy. Marcus ran his hand along the wall as he walked, his engineer's mind appreciating the sophistication of the design. Theodore Hartley had not just hidden a vault, he had created a preservation system that had kept these chambers viable for nearly a century without electricity, without modern climate control, using nothing but passive systems and brilliant design. The passage curved, descended slightly, and opened into the first chamber. Marcus stood in the doorway and took a deep breath before stepping inside. He turned on his phone's camera and began documenting everything systematically, the way he used to document buildings before demolition, noting every detail. The first chamber was roughly 20 feet square with a ceiling about 10 feet high. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with custom-built storage, mahogany cabinets with glass doors, open shelving with decorative molding, and built-in drawers with brass pulls that had not tarnished despite the decades. Everything was arranged with meticulous organization, labeled in neat handwriting on small brass plaques. Marcus approached the nearest cabinet. Behind the glass were paintings, dozens of them, stored vertically in custom slots that kept them from touching each other. He carefully opened the door, which swung smoothly on hinges that someone had clearly maintained with oil, and selected the nearest painting. It was wrapped in oiled cloth that crinkled softly as he unwrapped it. The painting underneath stole his breath. A landscape, definitely American West, showing mountains at sunset with light that seemed to glow from within the canvas. The technique was extraordinary, the kind of skill that Marcus's untrained eye could still recognize as genius. In the bottom right corner, a signature, A. Bierstadt. Marcus's hands trembled as he carefully rewrapped it and selected another. This one was a seascape, waves crashing against rocks with such power and motion that he could almost hear them. The signature read, W. Homer. He moved through the cabinet methodically, documenting each piece. Albert Bierstadt, Winslow Homer, Frederick Church, Thomas Moran, names he vaguely recognized from art history books he had skimmed during his research on Victorian-era culture. These were not just valuable paintings. These were masterpieces by the giants of American landscape art, pieces that museums and collectors had probably been searching for, pieces that art historians had listed as lost or destroyed or in unknown private collections. The second cabinet held portraits and figure studies: John Singer Sargent, Mary Cassatt, James McNeill Whistler, each one pristine, perfectly preserved, waiting in the dark. Marcus counted 47 paintings in total in just this first chamber, each one carefully documented in a leather-bound ledger he found in one of the drawers. The ledger was in Theodore Hartley's own handwriting, Marcus assumed, given that it matched the notes on the architectural drawings upstairs. Each painting had an entry: artist, title, date acquired, price paid, condition notes. Marcus photographed every page, his mind reeling from the implications. Hartley had not just collected these randomly. He had built this collection deliberately, acquiring pieces over decades, documenting everything with the precision of a scholar. Marcus moved to the shelves that held not paintings but documents. Archival boxes, dozens of them, made from acid-free materials that someone in the 1890s or early 1900s had somehow known to use. He opened the first box carefully. Inside were stock certificates, not photocopies or reproductions, but original documents on heavy paper with elaborate engravings and official seals. Marcus recognized some of the company names: mining corporations, railroad companies, early automobile manufacturers. These were not just stocks. They were pieces of American industrial history, shares in the companies that had built the modern economy. Some were probably worthless now, companies long defunct. But others, Marcus suspected, might still have value, especially as historical artifacts. The second box contained land deeds and property documents. Hartley had owned mines throughout Arizona and Nevada, property in San Francisco, timberland in Oregon. The documentation was meticulous, with maps, surveys, and legal descriptions that would make any modern title company weep with envy. The third box made Marcus sit down hard on the floor. Bearer bonds. Stacks of them, neatly organized in sleeves. Bearer bonds, unlike modern registered securities, belonged to whoever physically held them. They were as good as cash, and these were issued by the United States government, municipalities, and major corporations from the 1880s through the early 1900s. Most were probably still valid, still redeemable, if anyone bothered to present them. The denominations made his head spin: $1,000, $5,000, $10,000. In 1900, those had been fortunes. In today's money, with interest accumulated over more than a century, they would be worth exponentially more. Marcus spent 2 hours in the first chamber, documenting everything, taking hundreds of photographs, making notes. By the time he moved to the passage leading to the second chamber, his hands had stopped shaking, but his mind was overflowing with questions and implications. The second chamber was smaller, more intimate, clearly designed as Hartley's personal workspace. There was a desk, solid oak, with a leather chair that looked like it would still be comfortable despite its age. The desk surface was clear except for a single leather portfolio closed with a leather strap. But the walls were what made Marcus forget to breathe. More paintings, but these were different. Not American landscapes and portraits, but European masters. Marcus did not need to read signatures to know these were old, important, valuable beyond measure. He moved closer to the nearest one, a portrait of a young woman in Renaissance clothing, her expression enigmatic. The brushwork so delicate it looked like it might smudge if he breathed on it. The small placard beneath it read, "Workshop of Leonardo da Vinci, circa 1505. Marcus backed away slowly. He was not an art expert, but he knew enough to understand that Workshop of Leonardo meant this painting had been created in da Vinci's studio, possibly under his direct supervision, possibly even with his own hand contributing to it. Museums fought over pieces like this. They were literally priceless. The next painting was labeled as a Caravaggio, the one after that, a Vermeer. There were 15 paintings in this chamber, each one representing the pinnacle of European art from the 1400s through the 1700s, each one documented in another ledger with provenance information, purchase details, and notes about authentication. How had Theodore Hartley acquired these? Marcus flipped through the ledger, reading entries. Estate sales, apparently. Private collections being liquidated. A couple purchased directly from European dealers in the 1880s and 90s, before regulations and international agreements made moving such treasures difficult. Hartley had been wealthy enough, connected enough, and smart enough to acquire pieces that would later become impossible for private individuals to own. But it was the desk portfolio that held the real revelation. Marcus opened it with trembling fingers and found personal letters, dozens of them, written in Hartley's own hand. They were not addressed to anyone, more like a journal, thoughts and explanations written down for posterity, or perhaps for whoever eventually found this place. Marcus read them standing up, unable to sit, unable to look away. The first letter was dated March 15, 1929, just months before the stock market crash that would trigger the Great Depression. To whoever finds this collection, know that I am not a thief, not a hoarder, not a madman, though I am certain history will paint me as such. I am simply a man who has lived long enough to see fortunes vanish overnight, to watch banks collapse and take good people's savings with them, to observe governments seize property and redistribute wealth according to the whims of politicians who understand nothing of what it takes to build something of value. I made my money through hard work and calculated risk, pulling ore from mountains that tried to kill me, investing in industries that others feared. Every dollar I earned came from my own sweat and vision, and I will not allow it to be taken from me by institutions that cannot be trusted to survive the next panic. This collection represents 37 years of acquisition and careful stewardship. These artworks are not merely valuable. They are irreplaceable pieces of human achievement. They deserve better than to be seized by governments, fought over by heirs, or sold at auction to the highest bidder without regard for their historical significance. So I have hidden them, built this vault to protect them until the world is stable enough to deserve them again. Perhaps that day will come in my lifetime. Perhaps not. But they will be safe here, preserved, waiting. Marcus read letter after letter, watching Hartley's thought process evolve. After the crash of '29, the letters became more paranoid, more desperate. Hartley described watching friends lose everything, seeing banks fail, observing the government seize gold from private citizens. Each event confirmed his belief that hiding his wealth was the only rational choice. But there were also letters of regret. Letters written in the last years of Hartley's life, where he questioned whether he had been right, whether hiding away beauty and wealth served any purpose, whether he should have trusted the future more than he feared it. The last letter was dated July 3, 1931, less than a month before Hartley died. I am an old man now, and I wonder if I have made a terrible mistake. What good is a fortune that no one can see? What value does art have if no one can experience it? I have protected these treasures so well that they have become imprisoned, and in imprisoning them, I have imprisoned myself. If you have found this place, if you are reading these words, then you have accomplished what I could not. You have brought light into this darkness. I ask only this: treat these pieces with the respect they deserve. Let them teach, let them inspire, let them remind people of what humanity is capable of creating. Do not let fear turn them into secrets again. The collection's estimated value as of this writing is $18,300,000. Use it wisely. Use it well. Use it better than I did. Marcus's vision blurred with tears he had not realized were falling. Theodore Hartley had not been a villain or a madman. He had been a frightened man trying to protect what he valued in a world that felt increasingly dangerous and unpredictable. And in the end, he had realized that protection without purpose was just another form of loss. Marcus carefully placed the letters back in the portfolio and moved to the third chamber. He needed to see everything, to understand the full scope before he could decide what to do. The third chamber was the vault within the vault, the real treasury. It had an actual steel door, the kind of security that had been cutting edge in the early 1900s. The door stood open, and Marcus understood why. Hartley had been the only one who knew about this place, the only one who could access it. He had not needed to lock the door because the entire vault system was the lock. Inside, the chamber was smaller, maybe 10 by 10 feet, but every inch was utilized. Custom-built shelving held wooden boxes, each one labeled. Marcus opened the first box and felt his knees go weak. Gold bars. Not coins, not jewelry, but actual ingots. Each one probably weighed about 25 pounds, and there were rows of them, stacked neatly, filling multiple shelves. Marcus counted quickly. 47 bars in total. At current gold prices, which Marcus had looked up recently out of idle curiosity, each bar would be worth somewhere around $500,000. 47 bars meant roughly $23 million in gold alone. But that was not all. Other boxes contained gemstones, diamonds, rubies, emeralds, sapphires, all sorted by type and quality. These were not raw stones, but cut gems, investment-grade pieces that Hartley had acquired as portable wealth. Marcus had no idea how to value them, but even his untrained eye could see they were exceptional. And then there were more bearer bonds, but these were different from the ones in the first chamber. These were in denominations of $50,000 and $100,000, issued by rock-solid institutions, with accumulated interest clauses that meant they had been growing in value for over a century. Marcus did rough mental math and felt dizzy. Just the bonds in this chamber could be worth $50 million or more. He spent another hour documenting everything, his phone battery dying, his hands cramping from taking notes, his mind trying and failing to process the sheer magnitude of what he had found. When he finally climbed back up to the library, the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. He had been underground all night. Marcus sat on the library floor, his back against the wall, and tried to calculate a total value. The paintings alone, if they were authenticated and sold through proper channels, could bring $150 million or more. The bearer bonds, depending on their validity and accumulated interest, might be worth $50 to $70 million. The gold was straightforward, $23 million. The gemstones, the historical documents, the other artifacts, conservatively, another $10 to $20 million. Theodore Hartley had not lost his fortune in the crash of '29. He had hidden a collection worth, in today's money, somewhere between $200 and $300 million. And through a combination of luck, stubbornness, and $8,000 at a county auction, Marcus Webb now legally owned it all. He started laughing, a sound somewhere between hysteria and disbelief. 2 months ago, he had been trying to figure out how to afford a sheet of plywood. Now he was sitting on top of one of the largest private treasure troves in American history. The irony was so absurd it felt like a cosmic joke. But the laughter died quickly, replaced by something heavier. This was not just about money. This was about responsibility. Those paintings were not just valuable. They were part of human cultural heritage. The European masterpieces, the American landscapes, the historical documents, these things belonged in museums where people could see them, study them, be inspired by them. Keeping them hidden, even with good intentions, would be repeating Hartley's mistake. And beyond the moral implications, there were practical ones. Marcus could not just start selling bearer bonds or gold bars without triggering every alarm in the financial system. He could not approach auction houses about lost masterpieces without provenance documentation. He could not keep this secret. Not really. Not if he wanted to do right by these treasures and by Hartley's final wishes. He needed help, professional help, legal help, the kind of help that came with risks and complications and the certainty that his life was about to change in ways he could not control or predict. Marcus pulled out his phone and stared at it for a long time. Then he made a decision. He called Rose first. "It is 6 in the morning," she said when she answered, but her voice was alert, not sleepy. "I need you to come to the house," Marcus said. "I need a witness for what I am about to do." "I will be there in 20 minutes. Next, he called the FBI field office in Phoenix. It took 3 transfers before he got someone who would listen, and when Marcus said the words, "I have found a hidden vault containing art and artifacts worth over $200 million," there was a long silence. "Sir, if this is a prank—" "It is not a prank," Marcus said, his voice steady. "My name is Marcus Webb. I own the Hartley Mansion in Copper Ridge. I have found a hidden vault system containing paintings, bearer bonds, gold, gemstones, and historical documents hidden by the original owner in the early 1900s. I have photographs. I have documentation. I need someone from your art crimes division here as soon as possible." Another long silence. "Stay where you are. Do not touch anything else. We will have agents there within 3 hours." By the time Rose arrived, Marcus had made 4 more calls, to an attorney who specialized in found treasure law, to the Arizona Historical Society, to the Smithsonian's American Art Museum, and to a curator at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles who specialized in Renaissance art. Each conversation was surreal, each person moving from skepticism to shock as Marcus described what he had found. Rose found him sitting in the library, surrounded by his photographs and notes, looking shell-shocked. "You opened it," she said simply. "I opened it," he confirmed. "Rose, it is more than I could have imagined, more than anyone could have imagined. Hartley did not just hide a fortune, he hid a piece of history." She sat down beside him, and together they waited for the authorities to arrive. The FBI agents came first, 3 of them, led by a woman named Special Agent Catherine Walsh, who specialized in art theft and recovery. She was professional, skeptical, and clearly prepared for this to be either a hoax or a massive waste of time. But when Marcus led her down to the vault and she saw the first chamber, her professional composure cracked. "Oh my God," she whispered, standing in front of the Albert Bierstadt landscape. "This is real. This is actually real." More agents arrived. Then art historians. Then authentication experts. By mid-afternoon, the mansion was filled with people carefully documenting, photographing, and examining every piece in the collection. Someone set up lights in the vault chambers. Someone else brought in specialized equipment to assess the climate conditions. The entire operation had the feel of an archaeological dig, careful and reverent and barely controlled chaos. Marcus stood in the library, watching experts come and go, and felt completely disconnected from his body. This morning, he had been a struggling veteran trying to restore a house with $143 to his name. Tonight, he was the center of what Special Agent Walsh called one of the most significant art and artifact discoveries in American history. The media arrived by evening. Someone had leaked the story, probably one of the agents or historians, and suddenly the long driveway to the mansion was filled with news vans. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, helicopters circled overhead. The town of Copper Ridge, population 2,300, was under siege. Sheriff Mullins, the same man who had once told Marcus he was wasting his time on the house, showed up to provide security. "Guess you were not crazy after all," he said, looking slightly embarrassed. "Guess not," Marcus replied. That night, Marcus's face was on every major news network. Veteran discovers $250 million fortune in abandoned mansion. Lost masterpieces found in Arizona vault. The Hartley collection, America's greatest hidden treasure. His phone rang constantly. Reporters, lawyers, investment advisors, people claiming to be relatives of Theodore Hartley, people offering to write books about his story, everyone wanting a piece of what he had found. Marcus turned off his phone and sat in Rose's kitchen drinking tea, trying to process what had just happened to his life. "Tomorrow, everything changes," Rose said softly. "You know that, right? You are not going to be just Marcus Webb anymore. You are going to be the man who found the Hartley fortune."
I know, Marcus said. I am terrified.
"Good," Rose said. "Fear means you understand what you are dealing with. But Marcus, you did the right thing. Theodore Hartley spent his whole life hiding beauty from the world. You brought it back into the light. That matters."
Lily called, having seen the news at her mother's house. "Dad, they are saying you are going to be really rich. Is that true?"
"I do not know yet, kiddo," Marcus said honestly. "It is complicated, but yeah, probably." "Does this mean we do not have to live in the trailer anymore?" Marcus felt his throat tighten.
"Yeah, baby. I think we are going to be okay now."
When he finally made it back to the trailer late that night, Marcus sat in the darkness and thought about the journey that had brought him here. 6 months ago he had been broken, mocked, barely surviving. He had bought a ruined house everyone said was worthless because he needed to prove he could still fix something, still matter, still contribute something to the world. And in fixing that house, in refusing to give up on it when everyone said he should, he had stumbled into the discovery of a lifetime. Theodore Hartley had hidden his fortune because he feared loss. Marcus had found it because he was willing to risk everything on something everyone else had given up on. The symmetry was almost poetic, but as Marcus sat there in the dark, he realized something important. The discovery would make him wealthy, yes, would solve all his financial problems, would change his life in countless practical ways. But that was not why his hands had stopped shaking, why his nightmares had become less frequent, why he could look at himself in the mirror again without flinching. The restoration had done that. The work, the purpose, the slow process of taking something broken and making it whole again, not because it would make him rich, but because it deserved to be saved. The treasure was just a bonus, an extraordinary twist of fate. But the real transformation had happened in the months of labor, the weekends with Lily, the quiet conversations with Rose, the stubborn refusal to let mockery and doubt and pain stop him from finishing what he had started. Marcus Webb had come to that auction looking for a house to restore. What he had found was a way to restore himself, and the fortune hidden beneath the floorboards was just the universe's way of confirming what he had already learned. Sometimes the things everyone else sees as worthless turn out to be the most valuable treasures of all. Outside, the desert night was vast and filled with stars. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, decisions, complications, and a level of attention Marcus had never wanted. But tonight, sitting in his trailer with his bad leg aching and his heart finally at peace, Marcus allowed himself to feel something he had not felt since before the explosion that had shattered his life. He felt proud of himself, and in that moment, no amount of gold or paintings or bearer bonds could have felt more valuable than that. The investigation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of experts, attorneys, authentication specialists, and federal agents turning Marcus's discovery into an official historical event. The Hartley Mansion became a secured site, with FBI agents posted at the gates and historians working around the clock to document every single item in the vault. Marcus was not allowed to remove anything, not allowed to make decisions about the collection, not even allowed to enter his own property without an escort. It was frustrating, invasive, and absolutely necessary. Patricia Gardner, the attorney who specialized in found treasure law, met with Marcus almost daily in Rose's kitchen, which had become his temporary command center. She was a sharp woman in her early 50s, with gray-streaked hair. She did not bother to dye, and an ability to explain complex legal concepts in plain English that Marcus appreciated more than she probably knew. "Here is the situation," she said one morning, spreading documents across Rose's table. "The good news is that you have an ironclad claim to everything in that vault. You legally purchased the property through a public auction. The deed gives you ownership of the structure and everything within it. Theodore Hartley died without a will. His estate was never properly settled, and there are no living heirs with any documented claim. Under Arizona law, you are the legal owner. And the bad news? Marcus asked, because there was always bad news. The IRS is going to want their share. The state of Arizona will claim a portion. Several museums are already filing petitions arguing that pieces should be placed in public trust rather than private ownership. You are looking at years of legal challenges, valuations, tax negotiations, and bureaucratic nightmares. She paused. But Marcus, even in the absolute worst-case scenario, even if you lose half to taxes and legal fees, you are still looking at retaining somewhere between $150 million. The number was so absurd that Marcus had trouble connecting it to reality. 6 months ago, he had been counting quarters for gas money. Now attorneys were discussing 9-figure sums like they were talking about the weather.
How long before I can actually access any of it? He asked.
The FBI has already released the bearer bonds that are clearly yours to a secure holding facility. Those can be liquidated relatively quickly, maybe 90 days. You are looking at approximately $60 million from those alone. The paintings and artifacts will take longer to sell or place, probably 2 to 3 years for the full process.
But Marcus, within 6 months you will have more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes.
Marcus thought about his trailer with the leaking roof, about Lily's school supplies he had been buying from the dollar store, about the restoration project he had nearly abandoned because he could not afford plywood. The contrast was so stark it felt like he was discussing someone else's life. But Patricia was not finished. There is something else you need to understand. The discovery of the Hartley collection is a major historical event. The art world is losing their minds right now. Several of those paintings were thought to be lost forever. The Vermeer alone is worth probably $40 million. Museums around the world are already reaching out about loans, purchases, exhibitions. You are not just wealthy now, Marcus. You are important. You are a guardian of cultural heritage. The weight of that responsibility hit Marcus harder than the financial implications. These were not just valuable objects. They were pieces of human achievement, windows into different eras, works of art that could teach and inspire generations. Theodore Hartley had hidden them out of fear. Marcus had a chance to do what Hartley could not, share them with the world. While the legal process ground forward, the media circus intensified. National news networks ran features on the discovery. The Washington Post published a long article about Theodore Hartley's life and paranoia. Art magazines analyzed the collection, comparing it to other major finds. And at the center of all of it was Marcus Webb, the struggling veteran who had refused to give up on an impossible dream. The town of Copper Ridge transformed overnight. Suddenly, the population sign that had read 2,300 and dropping was updated to reflect an influx of curiosity seekers, journalists, and tourists. The local diner was so packed that they had to bring in extra staff. The gas station ran out of fuel twice in 1 week. The tiny motel on Highway 9 had a waiting list for rooms. And the attitude toward Marcus changed so dramatically it would have been funny if it were not so transparent. Rick Shaw, the contractor who had mocked Marcus publicly and called him brain-damaged in the newspaper, showed up at Rose's house with a bottle of expensive bourbon and a business card. "Marcus, hey, good to see you," Rick said, all smiles and outstretched hand. "I have been thinking, when you are ready to finish the restoration, Shaw Construction would love to help. We could give you a great deal, friend rate, you know." Marcus looked at the hand, then at Rick's face, and saw the calculation there, the barely disguised greed. He thought about the newspaper article still pinned to the wall in the mansion's library, about the laughter when he had bought the property, about the casual cruelty of people who kick others when they are down. "No, thank you," Marcus said quietly. "I have got other plans." Rick's smile faltered. "Come on, man. I was just joking around before. You know how it is." "Yeah," Marcus said. "I know exactly how it is. Have a good day, Rick." The encounters like that kept happening. People who had crossed the street to avoid talking to him suddenly wanted to be his best friend. The newspaper editor who had run the mocking article called to ask if Marcus would like to write a first-person account of the discovery. The mayor, who had once called the mansion an eyesore and Marcus an embarrassment, announced that the town was planning a Marcus Webb Day to celebrate their local hero. It was Rose who helped Marcus navigate the sudden attention with something resembling grace. "Remember," she told him one evening, "hurting people hurt people, but healed people help people. You have got a choice now about which one you want to be." So Marcus tried. He did not accept most of the offers of friendship from people whose motives were transparent, but he did not go out of his way to be cruel either. He just focused on what mattered: Lily, the restoration, and figuring out what kind of legacy he wanted to build with this impossible fortune. The answer came to him one night while sitting with a group of veterans at a VA support meeting he had been attending sporadically for months. These men and women were his people, warriors trying to figure out how to live in a world that did not quite understand what they had been through. Some were homeless. Some were employed but barely hanging on. All of them were fighting invisible battles against memories, trauma, and a society that wanted them to just get over it and move on. Marcus realized he could help them, really help them, not with pity or platitudes, but with resources and understanding and the kind of practical support that actually made a difference. 2 months after the discovery, with the first wave of bearer bonds liquidated and $60 million sitting in a bank account that Marcus still could not quite believe was real, he established the Hartley Webb Veterans Foundation. The name honored both the man whose fortune made it possible and the purpose it would serve. The foundation's mission was threefold: provide transitional housing for homeless veterans, fund innovative PTSD treatment programs, and offer job training and education scholarships. Marcus seeded it with an initial donation of $20 million, ensuring it would have the resources to make a real impact immediately. He hired staff, people who understood veteran issues, people who had been where he had been. He consulted with experts at the VA, with psychologists who specialized in trauma, with organizations that had been doing this work for years, and he made one rule absolute: no veteran would ever be made to feel like they were receiving charity. This was respect, recognition of service, and a hand up, not a handout. The first project was purchasing and renovating a 40-unit apartment building in Phoenix. Not a shelter, not a halfway house, but actual apartments with kitchens and privacy and dignity. Veterans could stay up to 18 months while they got back on their feet, with on-site support services, job placement assistance, and mental health resources. No strings, no religious requirements, no judgments, just safe housing and genuine support. Marcus attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony with Lily at his side. When they asked him to give a speech, he kept it short. 3 months ago, I was 1 bad week away from being homeless myself, he said into the microphone, his voice steady. I know what it feels like to wonder if you matter, if anyone cares, if there is any point in keeping going. This building is my answer to that question. You matter. We care. And there is always a point in keeping going because you never know what tomorrow might bring. The applause was thunderous, but what Marcus remembered most was the veteran who approached him afterward, a young woman probably in her mid-20s with haunted eyes that Marcus recognized in his own mirror. Thank you, she whispered. I was living in my car. Now I have got an apartment. I start a new job on Monday. You gave me my life back. Marcus had to step away before his composure cracked entirely. That moment, that gratitude, was worth more than any amount of money in any vault. While the foundation took shape, the restoration of the Hartley mansion continued, but now with resources that made the work transform from impossible struggle to magnificent achievement. Marcus hired a team of specialists, historical architects who understood Victorian construction, craftsmen who still knew how to work with traditional materials, artisans who could replicate period details with perfect accuracy. But he insisted on being involved in every decision, on maintaining the vision he had developed during those early months of working alone. This was not going to be some generic restoration where modern convenience erased historical character. This was going to be authentic, respectful, a preservation of Theodore Hartley's original vision executed with the care and resources Hartley himself would have wanted. The collapsed East Wing was rebuilt using salvaged materials and period-appropriate techniques. The grand staircase was reinforced and refinished, each baluster hand-turned to match the originals. The tower room with its intact stained glass became a meditation space, quiet and beautiful. Every floor was restored to its original glory. Every window was either carefully repaired or precisely replicated. Every wall was plastered using traditional methods and painted in historically accurate colors. The work took 18 months. Marcus was there almost every day, not swinging hammers anymore, but overseeing, consulting, making decisions. Lily came every weekend, watching her father's dream take shape in wood and stone and glass. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing month, built not just on love but on shared purpose and the pride of creating something meaningful together. Rose became an unofficial historian for the project, sharing stories her grandmother had told her, providing context and details that made the restoration more than just technically accurate. She was there when they uncovered the original kitchen tiles, when they found initials carved into a beam by workers in 1823, when they discovered that the tower room had originally been painted with a mural of the Arizona sky that they were able to partially restore. "My grandmother would have loved to see this," Rose said one afternoon, standing in the fully restored library. "She used to tell me about how beautiful this place was. Now it is beautiful again." Marcus made sure the foundation paid Rose a consulting fee that, while she protested, would make her retirement more comfortable. It was a small way to honor the kindness she had shown him when everyone else had written him off. The decision about what to do with the Hartley collection itself required months of negotiation and soul-searching. Marcus could have sold everything, could have kept the paintings in private storage, could have done what Hartley had done and hidden beauty away. But that felt like a betrayal of the journey that had brought him here. Instead, he worked out an arrangement that felt right. The most significant pieces, the European masterpieces, were donated to major museums with the stipulation that they be displayed prominently and credit the Hartley collection. The Vermeer went to the National Gallery, the Caravaggio to the Getty, the Leonardo workshop piece to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Each museum paid Marcus what they called a donation receipt, essentially a tax-advantaged payment that still resulted in millions of dollars while ensuring the art was accessible to the public. The American art, the landscapes and portraits by Bierstadt and Homer and the others, became the foundation of a new museum, the Hartley House Museum, located in the fully restored mansion. It opened 2 years after Marcus had first turned that key in the rusted lock. 2 years after everyone had told him he was crazy. The grand opening was attended by dignitaries, art historians, veterans, and locals. The governor gave a speech. The director of the Smithsonian attended. Major news networks covered it. But what Marcus remembered most was walking through the rooms with Lily, seeing her eyes widen at the paintings now properly lit and displayed, hearing her whisper, "Dad, you did this. You saved all of this." The mansion was no longer just a house. It was a living museum, the vault chambers accessible via guided tours, the architectural drawings and Theodore Hartley's personal letters displayed in climate-controlled cases, the story of the discovery told through photographs and artifacts. Visitors could walk the same passages Marcus had walked, could see where the hidden doors had been concealed, could understand the paranoia and brilliance of a man who had hidden a fortune for a century. But the museum was only part of the building's new purpose. The second and third floors became the Hartley Webb Veterans Resource Center, offering counseling services, job training programs, and meeting spaces for veterans groups. It was free to use, always, with staff who understood the unique challenges of transitioning from military to civilian life. The mansion that had once stood empty and forgotten now buzzed with purpose and life. Copper Ridge transformed along with the mansion. Tourism became a major industry. New businesses opened. Restaurants, hotels, shops selling local crafts and historical memorabilia. Property values increased. The high school, which had been threatened with closure due to declining enrollment, saw families moving into the area specifically because of the economic opportunities the museum and foundation had created. The town went from dying to thriving, all because one stubborn veteran had refused to let a ruined house defeat him. Marcus moved out of the trailer, of course. He bought a modest home on the edge of town, nothing ostentatious, just a solid 3-bedroom house with a workshop in the garage and a yard where Lily could play. He could have bought a mansion, could have moved to Phoenix or California or anywhere, but Copper Ridge was home now. These people, even the ones who had mocked him, were his community, and he had learned that running away from difficulty never solved anything. Lily's life changed too, but Marcus worked hard to make sure she stayed grounded. Yes, they had money now. Yes, her college education was secure. Yes, she would never have to worry about the financial struggles that had defined her childhood. But Marcus made sure she understood that privilege came with responsibility. She volunteered at the Veterans Center on weekends. She led tours at the museum for school groups. She learned that wealth was a tool, not an identity. One evening, about 3 years after the discovery, Marcus and Lily sat on the porch of their new house watching the sunset paint the desert sky in impossible colors. Lily was 15 now, poised between childhood and adulthood, still his little girl but becoming her own person. "Dad," she said quietly, "do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not bought the house? If you had listened to everyone who said it was impossible?" Marcus thought about that trailer, about the disability checks that barely covered expenses, about the weight of feeling useless and broken. "All the time," he admitted. "I think about how close I came to not doing it, how easy it would have been to just keep surviving instead of trying to live." "What changed your mind?" "Honestly, I do not know. Stubbornness, maybe. Or desperation, or maybe I just needed to prove to myself that I was still worth something, that I could still contribute something meaningful to the world." He looked at his daughter. "What I learned, though, is that the discovery, the fortune, all of that was just a bonus. The real transformation happened in those first few months when I was working alone, when I was choosing every day to keep going even though it seemed impossible. That is what saved me, not the money." Lily leaned against his shoulder. "I am proud of you, Dad. Not because you found a treasure, but because you never gave up." Marcus felt his throat tighten. That simple statement, that unconditional pride from his daughter, was worth more than everything in that vault had been. The 4th anniversary of buying the Hartley Mansion fell on a crisp October day. The museum was hosting a special exhibition featuring some of the American landscape paintings that had been on loan to other institutions but were returning home. Marcus stood in the grand foyer, the same space where he had first stepped 4 years ago, and marveled at the transformation. The water stains were gone, replaced by smooth plaster painted in historically accurate cream and sage green. The chandelier overhead, which he had carefully restored piece by piece, glittered with original crystal. The floors gleamed, showing off the grain of wood that had grown in forests 300 years ago. Every detail was perfect, from the door hardware to the window treatments to the way sunlight streamed through restored stained glass. But more than the physical beauty, the space was alive. Visitors moved through the rooms, their voices a gentle murmur of appreciation. School children sketched the paintings. A veteran sat quietly in the library reading room Marcus had established. Docents, many of them locals who had been trained and hired by the museum, shared stories about Hartley and the discovery. Rose found Marcus standing there, his eyes suspiciously bright. At 87 now, she moved more slowly, but her mind was as sharp as ever. "Thinking deep thoughts?" she asked. "Just remembering," Marcus said. "4 years ago I stood in this exact spot and saw only ruin. I remember thinking that maybe fixing this house would fix me somehow, and everyone thought I was crazy."
"Everyone was wrong," Rose said firmly. "Well, except me. I knew you had it in you."
Marcus smiled. "You were the first person to believe in me. I have never thanked you properly for that. You did not need to thank me. You needed to believe in yourself, and you did. That is all the thanks I need." She paused. "Though I will admit that consulting fee you insisted on paying me did not hurt. My granddaughter is going to a very nice college thanks to you." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the museum come alive around them. Rick Shaw walked by with what looked like his family, clearly tourists in their own town now. He saw Marcus and had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Marcus nodded at him politely. Holding grudges, he had learned, only weighed you down. Rick had taught him something important, that other people's limitations did not have to become his own. That evening, after the museum closed, Marcus invited a small group for a private celebration. Rose, Lily, Patricia the attorney, Special Agent Catherine Walsh, who had become a friend, and a few of the veterans who worked at the resource center. They gathered in the library, the room where so many of Marcus's important moments had happened, and raised glasses of champagne. "I want to say something," Marcus began, his voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. 4 years ago, I bought this house for $8,000 because I was desperate to prove I was not broken beyond repair. Everyone told me it was impossible, and honestly, they were probably right to be skeptical. I was a disabled veteran with no construction experience trying to restore a mansion that should have been condemned. He paused, looking around at the faces of people who had become his community, his family. "But what I learned is that sometimes the impossible things are the ones most worth doing. Not because you know you will succeed, but because trying is better than accepting defeat. This house, Theodore Hartley built it as a fortress to protect himself from a scary world. Then it sat empty for decades, forgotten, dismissed as worthless. But it was not worthless. It just needed someone who could see past the damage to the bones underneath, to the potential that was always there." Lily was crying softly. Rose was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even the tough veterans looked misty. "What I found in this house changed my bank account, yes, but what I built here changed my life, and I hope it has changed other lives too. I hope the veterans who come through our resource center feel seen and supported. I hope the visitors who see these paintings feel inspired by what humans can create. I hope this town, our town, knows that community and second chances and stubborn refusal to give up still matter in this world." He raised his glass. "To Theodore Hartley, who hid beauty but in doing so preserved it. To Rose, who believed when no one else did. To Lily, who never stopped believing in her dad. And to everyone who is fighting their own impossible battle right now, do not give up. You never know what you might find if you just keep going." The glasses clinked together, the sound clear and bright in the beautiful room. Later, after everyone had gone home, Marcus stood alone in the tower room, looking out over Copper Ridge. Lights twinkled in the darkness, more lights than there had been 4 years ago, signs of a community finding new life. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, about the explosion in Afghanistan that had shattered his body, about the years of struggling to find purpose, about the moment at that auction when he had raised his hand despite everyone's doubt. He thought about Theodore Hartley, alone in this house, writing desperate letters about protecting treasures while imprisoning them in darkness, about how fear could make you build walls so high that even you could not see past them anymore, about how the things you hide away to protect eventually become the things you lose. But Marcus had done something different. He had taken something hidden and brought it into the light. He had turned a fortress into a beacon. He had proven that broken things could be made whole, that dismissed things could be valuable, that impossible things could become real if you just refused to accept the limitations others tried to place on you.
His phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Love you, Dad. Proud to be your daughter."
Marcus smiled, his eyes burning with the good kind of tears. 4 years ago, he had been a man whom the world had written off, who had almost written himself off. Now he was a father his daughter was proud of, a guardian of cultural heritage, a founder of programs that were changing lives, and the stubborn fool who had saved a mansion everyone said should be demolished. The house that everyone said would destroy him had actually saved him, and in saving it, he had learned the most important truth of all, that the value of a thing is not determined by what others see, but by what you are willing to fight for. That giving up is always easier than persevering, but perseverance is what separates those who merely survive from those who truly live. Marcus Webb had bought a ruined mansion with his last $8,000. What he had found was not just a fortune in gold and art, but something far more valuable, a reason to wake up in the morning, a purpose that extended beyond his own pain, and the absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Marcus turned away from the window and walked through his restored mansion, turning off lights, checking locks, preparing to go home. But before he left, he stopped one more time in the library, in front of the bookshelf that concealed the passage to the vault below. "Thank you," he whispered to the empty room, to the ghost of Theodore Hartley, to the house itself. "Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for not giving up even when everyone else did." And somewhere in the silence of the old walls, in the echo of footsteps on restored floors, in the way the moonlight fell through stained glass, it almost felt like the house was whispering back, "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for believing. Thank you for proving that beautiful things deserve to be saved." Anyone can walk away from broken things and call it wisdom, but it takes real courage to see potential where others see ruin, to invest in the impossible, and to believe that sometimes the most valuable treasures are hidden in the places everyone else has abandoned. As morning broke over Copper Ridge 4 years after that fateful auction, Marcus Webb stood in the fully restored grand foyer of the Hartley Mansion with Lily at his side, preparing for another day at the museum. The early light streamed through stained glass, painting rainbow patterns across floors that gleamed like honey. Outside, the first tour bus of the day was pulling up the long driveway, bringing people from around the world to see what one stubborn veteran had refused to let die. "Ready for another day, Dad?" Lily asked, straightening the volunteer badge she wore with pride. Marcus looked around at the mansion that had saved his life, at the spaces that had gone from ruin to magnificence, at the daughter who had never stopped believing in him even when he had stopped believing in himself. He thought about the veterans who had come through the resource center today, looking for the same hope he had once desperately needed. He thought about the paintings on the walls, no longer hidden in darkness, but sharing their beauty with everyone who walked through these doors. He thought about Theodore Hartley's final letter, asking whoever found his collection to let it teach and inspire, to not let fear turn treasures into secrets again. "Yeah, kiddo," Marcus said, putting his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "I am ready." Because the house that everyone said would be Marcus Webb's grave had become his resurrection. The fortress built by fear had become a foundation for hope, and the broken veteran whom no one believed in had become living proof that second chances are real, that perseverance matters, and that sometimes the most impossible dreams are the ones most worth chasing. The doors opened. Visitors streamed in, their faces filled with wonder. And Marcus Webb, guardian of the Hartley Collection, founder of programs that had helped thousands of veterans, and the man who had proven that seeing value where others see ruin can change everything, smiled and got to work. Because his story was not really about finding a fortune in a hidden vault. It was about a man who refused to stay broken, a house that refused to stay ruined, and the beautiful truth that sometimes the best way to save yourself is to save something else first. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible true stories of transformation and triumph. Click to keep discovering, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that perseverance can turn impossible dreams into reality.